Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the LOTUS project, Leadership and Organization for Learning and Teaching at European Universities. My name is Tara Zhang. I'm the Deputy Director for Higher Education Policy at the European University Association, EUA, and I'm very glad to welcome you to this webinar. So the webinar will last 1 hour, and we will here discuss the key messages and final recommendations from the LOTUS project that is finishing this month, actually, after 2 years of project activities. So before we go further, I just would like to tell you some technical information. I think I should have a supporting slide for this. Here it is. So you have three ways of interacting with us. The first one is the chat. So normally you should see on your right side several tabs. There is one called chat. The chat is for greeting everybody and also for letting us know if you have any technical issues or any other remark like this. So if you have technical issues, please put that in the chat box. My colleagues in charge of helping us and supporting us with this webinar will take care of this and answer to you in the chat. If you have questions on what is being said, please don't use the chat box. Use the Q&A tab, which is the second one, at least on my screen, on the right side. So the second tab, Q&A, is for asking questions to the speakers. The Q&A box is moderated. It's facilitated. So don't be surprised if we don't ask your question straight ahead as it comes, but we will try to take up, of course, as many questions as possible. And then the third way of interacting with us is through the polls tab, which is the third and last one that you can see on your right side. And we will have two poll questions during this webinar, and we would like you, of course, to participate to those if possible. This is to share your views and opinions with the speakers, and also perhaps so that the speakers can further comment on your answers. I think I have mentioned all the technical information I needed to mention. So this is it for the technical part. And now I just would like to introduce you to my speakers of today. So today I will present the results of the LOTUS project, but I'm also here together with three speakers. The first one is Mary Fitzpatrick. Mary is the head for the Center of Transformative Learning at the University of Limerick in Ireland. And Mary has also participated in the LOTUS project and more precisely to the Leadership Development Program under the LOTUS project. Hello, Mary, and thanks to join us. And then we also have Philippe Lalle. Philippe is in France, and Philippe is the co-chair of the Bologna Follow-up Group, working group on learning and teaching. And if you attended the LOTUS Final Conference, you would also recognize Philippe because he was a co-facilitator in the said policy lab on teacher development. So we have worked together under the LOTUS project as well. Hello, Philippe, and thanks for being with us. And then we have Ruben. I'm happy to see that you have joined because we were waiting for you in the speaker's room before. So happy to see you here. Ruben Janssens is a student, a PhD candidate, and former representative of the European Students' Union, ESU, our partner in the LOTUS project. Ruben, you're based at Ghent University in Belgium, but also you have served as a facilitator for one of the leadership working groups in the LOTUS project for 2 years in a row. So you had two groups, actually, one after the other. And we are also very happy to have you with us today for this webinar. So with no further delay, I will try to share my screen. So thank you for your patience, and we can start now. As I already said, and as you probably already know, LOTUS stands for Leadership and Organization for Teaching at European Universities, and it was a 2-year project that we started in September 2020, and it was a project founded under the Erasmus Plus funding program of the European Commission, but under a specific call, and we called it the Bologna call because it was aiming at founding priorities under the Bologna process, one of them being learning and teaching. It was led by EUA, coordinated by EUA, and we were lucky to have 5 project partners who are all listed here: the Irish Universities Association, the Finnish Ministry for Education and Culture, ESU, our European Student Union, Eurasia, representing the Association of Institutions in Higher Education, and also the University of Economics and Business in Vienna. And we also had 3 associate projects: the Association of Conservatoires and EEDTU, representing distance teaching universities, as well as ETUs, representing teacher trade unions in Europe. So what we did during these 2 years is to try foster in higher education institutions' capacity to develop and implement structured and systematic approaches to enhance learning and teaching, and explore how learning and teaching can be best supported by national and European policies. And for this, we will, at the end of this project, so now, provide a set of recommendations for supporting learning and teaching development through interinstitutional cooperation, and for both European institutional, but also European and national levels. How we did that is basically through 2 strand of activities, sorry, through a leadership development program, as we called it, targeting institutions across the European higher education area. So the idea was to bring together institutions to foster the capacity to develop and implement structured and systematic approaches to enhance learning and teaching. So we mostly worked in a peer learning approach, and in an approach aiming to progress through assessing own challenges, needs, identifying issues of common interest and common priorities, and sharing approaches to address those challenges in a critical friend and peer learning perspective. The second strand of activities was what we called a policy dialogue between different groups of stakeholders, institutions, but also addressing national authorities, European level, etc., and to basically discuss how to contribute to policy making and explore together how to develop effective policies. In that context, we had several activities. We conducted a study on national development in learning and teaching. This was published earlier this year, and we also had a series of 5 policy dialogue workshops. The leadership development program, I think I forgot to mention that, gathered in total 54 institutions from 29 countries in the course of the 2 years. And in Brussels, at the end of September, we had a final conference, kind of trying to put together all these topics, but also to put together our thoughts in terms of discussing leadership in teaching, which was the red thread throughout the project and the main concept we wanted to work on throughout the project. So, what have we found out, and what did we come up with as key messages? First of all, what we have learned is that there is really a strong consensus on areas that institutions find challenging, and we tried to gather them under 4 key topics, let's say. The first one is addressing the students' needs, student-centered learning, but also more generally, how to address demand for more and more flexible learning and how to adapt after the pandemic. The second one was the question of teaching, so how to better recognize teaching and how to better support it. The third one was how to boost collaboration and exchange, including between institutions. And the fourth one was the importance of digital and relating to the future of post pandemic learning. I will now briefly go through the key messages that we had and relate to these 4 topics, and then we'll open for first round of discussion with my speakers. So, adapting to the students' needs, key messages. The first key message we found out was really the role of institutional leadership in achieving this common understanding for developing those learning approaches. I think that was quite strong, that came out quite strongly, because this is what would ensure commitment and also ownership from staff and students. The second point was Regular feedback loops and perhaps different and complementary feedback loops are needed for engaging students and having a functional student-centered approach. We very much and very often hear about the student evaluation surveys, but perhaps there are also other ways to engage with students regularly through large discussion groups, focus groups, etc. The third point is about finding out who the students are and what their needs are. So, evidence-based analysis of this, and also that this should be connected with developing and implementing inclusion and well-being strategies to support reflection on student needs and complement that in the development of any educational offer. The fourth point is about the student teacher partnership to develop student agency, value the learning process itself, but also provide some kind of recognition for student engagement. And the last point for this topic is for teachers. Sorry, so freedom for teachers, sufficient freedom for teachers for innovating regarding methods, regarding approaches to address student needs, to address sometimes also labor market needs and opportunities to learn from existing practices and advice on pedagogical approaches. The second topic is the teacher's world. So, teaching first should be recognized as an integral part of academic profession, and this is a very strong message that came out not only actually from Lotus but also from all other EUA activities on learning and teaching. It's a cross-cutting issue. The second point is also to try to promote a holistic view of this professional identity of academics. So, to take into account the different missions, such as teaching, but also research, service to society, etc., without overburdening professors, without overburdening teachers. This requires also a reform of academic career path and assessment, more parity of esteem, and such change may also require some time to be implemented, obviously. So we also make a plea here for solid monitoring processes, support measures, etc., etc. The third point was the teacher's intrinsic motivation to develop that should be nurtured. Motivation is key here in a context where, as we have seen under Lotus, it is not always mandatory in all countries for teachers to engage in continued professional development. So the motivational factor is key. And the fourth point is that policymakers and institutions may wish to review existing regulations and available support to find what would be most appropriate and fit for purpose for using available resources. We were saying that mostly because it was found out in some systems, in many systems actually, they are already supporting measures, but whether they're fit for purpose would be worth looking a bit more deeply into. The third topic is about interinstitutional cooperation. And this is really seen as a key enabler and driver for developing learning and teaching. But it also very much depends on how conducive the system level frameworks and environment are in terms of funding, how stakeholders are involved, etc. And it also requires an institution wide commitment, so trust building, commonly agreed direction, leadership that is responsive but also responsible. We also found out that the purpose and goals of any interinstitutional collaboration need to be clearly defined, commonly understood. So it's not only collaborating for the sake of collaborating, but it should be clear for everybody for what purpose and goals pursued together. And finally, but not least, students again should be key participants, but also enablers for such interinstitutional cooperation. The last topic I would like to underline here is digitalization in learning and teaching. And here we would like to underline the need for cross cutting strategies, policies, action plans on digital transformation. So, not only embracing learning and teaching strategies, but also digital infrastructures in general, the institution, and improving skills of staff and students when it comes to digital. Regulatory frameworks need to be adjusted in order to take into account different delivery modes. And we also found out that an evidence based approach and data analysis are essential for leading digital transformation. We also had a point about analyzing data, identifying student needs to better plan for student journey and increase access to education and widen participation. And last point was the staff workload. It has an impact on staff workload in terms of administration, technology support, training, etc. And this needs to be properly resourced so that everything does not fall on teachers and teachers are supported in this regard. All right, this is actually quite a lot already. So I will stop here and I'll also try to stop sharing if it works. Does it work? I think it works. Oh, that's great.
Yes.
Okay, I see everybody on screen. Right. So thank you everybody for being here. I'm stopping here because I would like to have a first round of discussion with you. Perhaps we can start with Mary, if you agree. Yes. And the question here was to all of you was really to share your thoughts and your experiences also based on what was presented on these key messages and also see a bit how you would relate to these priorities. Oh, but I forgot to launch the live poll, I think. Should I do that? Yes, there is a poll question also for the audience. Sorry, Mary. So I think one of my colleagues will launch it. If you could launch the live poll question. Can you see it? So the question was, which one of these key messages would be most useful in your context? And I can see the vote here, but only 2 people voted. So if we have more votes, that would be useful. I think we just selected a few options, not all of them. Interestingly, we had right now, I think we had the majority vote for recognition for teaching. And what comes second is the role of leadership for developing a common understanding of flexible learning. So, a role of institutional leadership. Oh, right. I see it's the number of answers is a bit stuck there. So I think we can close this. But obviously, the recognition of teaching is seen as quite important. So I'm coming back to my speakers and Mary first for your comment, your thoughts, and also just sharing your perspective from your institutional experience based on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm delighted to be here. In relation to the key themes that have emerged from the project, it was very interesting to hear you summarise them, and also for us during the conference to explore some of them in more detail. Certainly, what has come up very strongly here in the poll, but also across discussions, have been the approach to recognition of teaching and the role that teachers have and the professionalisation of the teacher in higher education. That is something that has long been a concern, I think, within the sector. It is something within the Irish context. Some work has been done in relation to developing a professional development framework. However, the challenge now is implementation of such a framework across the different cultures and types of institutions we have within the Irish sector. So that's something we have started to explore ourselves. We have initiated that from our own institution with our Irish University Association partners to establish how best can we engage with this complex task, particularly when we consider the parity of esteem between teaching and research. So when we look at somebody teaching in higher education, there's no requirement as such in relation to a qualification needed to teach within the higher education sector in Ireland for the most part. Some institutions have brought in some mandatory CPD, but for the most part that is not required. So therefore, while you may require a PhD within your discipline, there's no requirement of any professionalisation of your teaching skills or any pedagogical awareness. So that's something that we really need to look at within the sector and really give credit and validation for those who engage in excellent teaching, in expert teaching, beyond institutional teaching awards and sectoral teaching awards, actually looking at it within, if one had received a research grant, there would be a lot of status associated with that. So to align the parity of esteem between both research and teaching. So I'm going to pass over to my colleagues because I know we're under time pressure, and I'll hand back to you, Therese.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm coming to Philippe after Mary because I know this is also a topic dear to his heart, so he might wish to also elaborate on this. Philippe?
Yes, of course, the recognition of the teaching activity and the parity of esteem are essential. And I believe that everyone is in agreement. We say it everywhere in all meetings, but very concretely, things are not progressing very much, I believe. So, and even in France, where when I worked in the Ministry for Higher Education, several regulatory texts were adopted for this recognition. And progress is still very, very slow in France. In France, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but all the recruitment processes, the career progression processes or bonus allocation processes are peer-reviewed processes. And in these commissions in which I sit or I've sat, there is always the same old reflex of favoring research, uh, and so what I hear very frequently is that we cannot evaluate the quality of teaching, whereas evaluating research is supposedly easy because there are metrics, and I think that are fake excuses. But it's what I hear every time. And there is a second point which is closely related, is the question of training in pedagogy. And this is what we have made compulsory in France for 4 years now. For a new assistant professor, it's necessary to have a training to be recruited. So I would say, in fact, it's after the recruitment. During the first year, you have to be trained, and this is done by other teachers, by educational advisor that we find in support services. So what the idea I would like to add, maybe compared to your slides, is that it's necessary to rely on research in pedagogy for this training, and also not only for this training, but in our life as teachers. We very frequently we do as if nothing exists in pedagogy, and and every time the teachers seems to invent or reinvent what has been also done by others, what has been also already published. And as I as I had the opportunity to say during the LOTUS meeting in Brussels, if we had adopted what I would call the same non-method in molecular biology, we would not have discovered DNA yet. So there is an abundant literature on pedagogy, and all the teachers should know some of this literature.
Thank you. I was wondering if you would place your quotes during the webinar or not.
Done.
But yes, indeed, there is abundance. There is abundance of sources or evidence base that you can use for this. But indeed, what is lacking on the other side is really the recognition for your efforts as a teacher to dig into that. I will pass the floor to Ruben. Perhaps Ruben would like to comment as well on this topic or on something else that was striking for you, Ruben, in these key messages.
Yeah, thank you, Theris. Well, as I'm still kind of here as a student representative, I'm going to focus on some of the key messages that really involve students. And one of them that I found really important was that student-centered approaches require regular and different feedback loops with students and teachers. And that's so important to keep this in mind, like you said as well, that it's not just about having regular surveys, but students have to be involved in so many different ways, and that starts really within the classroom, that teachers there continuously ask students about their opinion, give options to students as well, and let them choose and let them be involved. And that goes up from within the classroom to an educational program to a university and further. We have a lot of places where student representatives are an established fact, although that's definitely not yet the case everywhere. So it continues to be incredibly important, but it it does go up. It's about the feedback loop in two directions as well. So one of the most striking things I remember from within one of my leadership development groups was how important it was to show students that something is done with the opinion that they share. One of the institutions shared that they would put up posters in toilet stalls in university with a list of accomplishments of changes that happened from student feedback. And that's one of the most important ways, such as in this example, to actually motivate students to participate. And that goes to the second key message I wanted to highlight as well, that student agency needs to be developed and valued and recognized as well. And that doesn't just go immediately. It's not just because you ask a student a question or that you have a student representative in some commission that students are perfectly involved. Because as a student, you're just there for maybe a couple of years. You don't really know how the university works. And then you get these big questions or get to participate in these big discussions with professors that have been there for 20 or 30 years. So actually making sure that there's meaningful student participation also means training them, giving them information, taking them apart, and asking them some clear questions. And ways such as this actually enable a much more fruitful cooperation between teachers, the university, and students, because that also builds a trust that's really needed to have true student-centered learning. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, I think, to go to the rest. But those I found the really most important things that I took away from the project.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruben. This is a very important, these are two actually very important point, although I'm not quite sure why what's important happens on the door of the toilet. But okay, I think it's very important indeed to close those feedback loops so that students basically have a confirmation that not only they participate, but they are being heard and they are being listened to and they have a voice, and this voice actually made a difference. All right, without further ado, I'll continue to my presentation, but I think this is a fine linkage also to what will come next, because the second part of this webinar is on the concept of leadership and teaching. And this is not only for leaders in the sense of vice rectors, deans, etc., but we will see that it also encompasses roles for members of the university community, so teachers and also students themselves. I'll try to share my screen again. As you may have seen, it actually takes a few seconds, so bear with us. In the meanwhile, I see that there might be questions in the Q&A box that came, but we will take them after this row, so no worries for that. All right. Next slide. So, in the context of the LOTUS project, what we defined, we tried to come up with a definition of what we wanted to work on, basically. So, it's not a perfect definition, but it defines quite well what we wanted to address. Of leadership in teaching as both an individual agency to develop strong strategic oversight, coordination, and implementation for learning and teaching, and also the institutional and collective capacity to address organizational development towards enhancement. So, how we saw leadership in teaching is really the intertwinement. I don't know if we say that in English. The interconnection of both an individual agency and also something more collective. And this, of course, implicitly also acknowledges that teaching is a collective activity. It's not only a personal activity you do as a teacher, as an individual, but it also has this collective dimension of getting organized, going together, coming out together in this activity that is an essential mission of universities. Um, What we came up with, and we have worked on that with people who were involved from the 54 institutions who were involved in the leadership development program, are actually is like sets of 9 peer-to-peer recommendations on leadership in teaching. So I listed them here, and I will very briefly comment on them. The first one is that learning and teaching is a central, clear, and visible mission of the institution, but also it means that leadership at the institution is instrumental for goal setting through collegial and participatory processes. You need to bring people together. We discussed a lot in the program on the goal setting, on how to find common directions, how to find a common goal for learning and teaching, for changing anything in learning and teaching, but also for how to improve things in teaching. The second recommendation was that leadership in teaching requires formal and informal structures and opportunities also for exchanges and cooperation across the institution. The third message is that we need to have a clear idea of balanced and also efficient decision making processes. So roles and responsibilities need to be clear. The fourth point is about time and opportunities for self reflection, for setting up the right atmosphere, creating the right atmosphere, and opportunities for self development, creativity, and open and free exchanges and sharing. So there is a need for initiatives and mechanisms to decrease workload of staff who is invited to also to exercise leadership in teaching. The fifth message is that in leaders' roles and responsibilities, it would be good to identify where improvement can take place for individual behaviors and competences, and at the same time for implementing policies and structures. So the idea is that at the institutional level, this would mean reviewing capacity and fitness for purpose of structures and organization needed to make transformation happen in these areas. For example, decision making, as we said, but also management approaches, human resource approaches, and policies, communication channels. We discussed a lot about communication, expertise and capacity for responding to training needs in pedagogy, etc., etc. And this is to create a shared leadership approach at the institution. The sixth key message is that there is no single way to demonstrate leadership. Leadership is a multifaceted concept, and for this, inclusive models and approaches for skills and competence development for leadership have to be developed and also promoted. So they can be differently scaled, they can be complementary support schemes, they can be complementary and different approaches, all participatory to enable different types of leaders in teaching. And this is all fine, I'm tempted to say. And the three last recommendations deal with the seventh one with disciplinary role models. So it may be actually um, easier for some teachers to relate with somebody who is from the same disciplinary field. Otherwise, changing teaching methods and approaches may seem a bit intimidating, if not intrusive. So, leaders in teaching from the same discipline can act as models to instill a sense and showcase examples of how to transform teaching. How do you do that exactly in our discipline, by the way? Oh, okay. I haven't thought about that, etc. So at the institutional level, it also means that some flexibility and leeway should also be there for faculties and for departments to develop their own approaches. The eighth point is about growing a context sensitive and practice sharing initiatives to throughout the institution to also address strategy implementation. So this idea of growing some pilots and try to monitor, gaining a better understanding of how it works, workload, showcasing what implementation would exactly entail to overcome possible resistance. And for this, we also need to define monitoring processes, feedback loops, and sustainability plans. And the last point is about interinstitutional exchange and cooperation. In order to transform learning and teaching, we should explore opportunities for interinstitutional exchange and cooperation, and the suitable fora for sharing practice, for sharing experiences, sharing challenges would prove quite useful also as mind openers. And this is really also a plea to make for broadening conversations at national and European levels on how to enhance learning and teaching. I think I will stop here. I just need to try to find the button. Just a second. Am I back in the room? Yes, I'm back in the room. I think we have a second poll question. If we could display that. We have a second poll question for our audience. So, dear audience, if you would like to participate, that would be great. Which of the recommendations would be the most useful in your context? I'm sorry, I cannot see myself the question. Yes, I see it. Can you see it displayed? Yes, so you can vote if you wish. Which one talks to you most? I see no vote. I don't know if that's normal. So the question is, which of the following recommendations would be most useful in your context? What would you find most useful for leading learning and teaching, but also leading changes if needed on learning and teaching? Okay, I think something doesn't work because I see no vote. I see no vote, so I think we can close perhaps the question and just resume discussion. I'm just quickly checking if in the Q&A we have questions. Just a second. Um, so I will perhaps first pick up the questions, and we can also in the same movement have a discussion on leadership and teaching, dear speakers, if you agree. So the question here is, what can we do as leaders in this space to advance recognition for teachers? This is a follow-up of actually the discussions we had before, which was to which was to complain basically that recognition for teacher did not happen yet. Um, and we have a second question. How can we promote interinstitutional cooperation despite the fact that there is competition in the field? All right. Okay. I'll first perhaps go for a round of discussion, and then we can also pick up the last question I see here, which is about how to effectively measure um, activities for training. Perhaps I'll start with Ruben this time. Ruben, would you like to first pick up some comments and also, if you wish, answer the questions that were already asked?
All right, yeah. About those recommendations regarding leadership, I think what I saw in the two leadership development groups that I facilitated in the project was that everything was about communication within the institution. Everything is about bringing together people and sharing one concept of what student-centered learning is, of what the learning and teaching vision is that you want to go towards, and to make sure that everybody is on board. And one of the ways is that part of the university management has to continue the conversation with people all across the university. And just like with students, participation, student engagements, there are different models for that as well. Going to talk with individual study programs, everyone who's involved in that, holding those big town halls. All those initiatives are crucial to actually making sure everybody's on board. And the other aspect of that is that it's not just formal. One of the recommendations is that leadership in teaching requires those formal and informal structures. And that's one of the most inspiring examples I saw as well in the leadership working group, where real change is actually just happening because individual teachers are sharing their practices and are sharing what works with each other. And as a university, one of the ways to recognize excellence in teaching is also to make sure that these examples are visible and to ask those teachers who are uh, who are implementing those excellent changes or have tried something out that really works, to ask them to share that with others as well, and to guide them and to mentor them to maybe implement those in their context. And that doesn't always have to be people who come from the same discipline. I think the biggest learning benefit that I saw in the leadership development program was people from completely different contexts speaking with each other and discovering that they actually did share some problems. So I think that those are one of the most important ways to see leadership in teaching and to make sure that we can actually progress towards a more student-centered leadership and learning and teaching.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I'm going directly to Philippe to ask him. Um, if you would like to comment, Philip.
Yes, I would like to talk about time, even if this proposition received only 11% of the votes. But for me, the question of time is very important, and I'm going to draw the parallel again with research. It takes time and opportunities for self-reflection. And teaching requires preparation, reflection, improvement, and it cannot be considered only as visible through the number of hours spent face to face with the students. And to come back to what has already been said, you have to train to teach, you have to put it into practice, you have to experiment, you have to be able to benefit from continuous professional development. And in research, we train throughout life by submitting our work to peer review for publication, by going to conferences, by learning new techniques, for example. And the parity of esteem is also that. It's considering that it's a real job which takes time. And in France, we are experimenting a sabbatic leave for developing a teaching project, and it's a kind of thing we could do to give time to the teachers. And if you allow me to come back to your first series of slides, there was already a point where you have already evoked the question of time. It was on the last slide. It was the question of new tools in developed for teaching, and I see that in my institution there is a lot of digital education tools, for example, for managing students' results, for reserving teaching premises, to visualize the timetables. But each time there is less position in the school services and more work for the teachers. And this is to the detriment of research, of teaching, and personal life. So the question of time is very important for me. To be a good teacher, you need to develop continuously, and you need time every day, but also during several years.
So it's a long, at least a middle, if not a long-term perspective that we need to adopt, and the way we need to approach time needs to take this into account. Definitely. I will go to Mary now. If Mary would like also to share your thoughts, Mary, on this and on the topics discussed, and then I'll quickly go back to the Q&A box again. Mary.
Thank you, Therese. Following up on Philippe's point there, the time is critical, and time and space to actually think about our teaching and think about our practice and think about our student feedback and consider everything that you've shared with us in those bullet points. I mean, we're all here today engaging and listening, and then when do we take the time to reflect on what we've heard and what we've shared with colleagues? And that's a piece I think Philippe has captured really well. The CPD piece and the professionalisation of the academic, for that to happen meaningfully, there has to be that recognition for the teaching as a valuable activity, so that people will give, and that those teaching will give time to think about their teaching, thinking about their practice, rather than the fact that we're consistently at capacity and moving from one project to the next, or one curriculum development piece to the next, and we don't have that time and space. And that's something I think is absolutely critical in order to address a lot of what you've highlighted for us today, Therese. In terms of interinstitutional collaboration, I think that's a critical point, and I think it's something that was evidenced really well over the last 2.5 years, when we were engaged in a more remote learning, teaching, and assessment approach. As institutions within national and international contexts, there was a lot of collaboration in terms of how best to do things. We weren't reinventing the wheel. We're engaging with colleagues in other institutions, but also in other contexts, to see how best to teach and engage our students in a meaningful learning experience in the remote context. And I think that was something that I would like to see continue beyond the emergency position that we were in. And certainly for that to happen in reality, most of the time there needs to be resources allocated to it for it to happen when it's not an emergency. So there are examples across the sector of interinstitutional projects that have been really well managed, because there's funding allocated, there's project management in a centralised element within the context that works really well, and we've had really good experiences of that within the Irish context, which have been included in your report. But certainly, I think if we were to capture all of this and everything that Reubens said as well around the importance of the student feedback and the student partnership and the student engagement, it all relates to making time for it and making it valuable, and recognising the input of the students, of the teachers, and of the time for reflection.
All right. Thank you, Mary. So the time factor, the two of you and also Ruben explained, very well why it really matters. And actually, Philip, I think there are a few people who voted for that also as the most important recommendation, or the most useful in their context. I just would like to go back to the poll results and pick up some of the most voted answers now that I can see the results. Hey, great. You see that the most popular option here, most useful, is also to review the roles and responsibilities for leaders and identify where improvement can take place. And then the second one is about formal and informal structures for exchange and collaborate and cooperation. Sorry. So, Ruben, you served as the facilitator for one of the leadership working groups for 2 years in a row, so each time with a separate group. And I believe, you, as already underlined, communication was very important, was a matter underlined as very important in your groups. But would you also like to share some thoughts about how to build up actually those formal and informal structures for exchange, and how this can work at best, and also how you think, in the framework of your groups, this had the question of roles and responsibilities for leading teaching was discussed.
That's a lot of questions. I
Yes,
think,
just pick up the one you want.
well, I think I was most struck by the power of the informal contact between teachers and between people involved in the university. I remember one of the institutions, one of the members of, I think, my first group shared how they started with this little retreat where they put, I think they had like 2 days, and they put a bunch of teachers together and they let them think about teaching. They shared how they did their learning and teaching, and thought about how that could progress, about how they can innovate and maybe go more towards student-centered learning. In any case, they had them have a very informal contact, and out of this really grew a community of sharing their practices, of trusting each other as well. And this feeling of community, I think, really enables teachers to think more openly about teaching, and that also just enables more motivation in those teachers to innovate more within their teaching. And I think this feeling of community is something that can be built up from informal events, but also from a formal way. Like I said in my previous answer, if people in leadership roles from management at different levels of university take the time and the initiative to bring people together and communicate and have open discussions where trust is really central, then you also build within this community, and you can actually go towards a shared vision on learning and teaching and move forward. And I think that's one of the things that I took away from the project most.
Thank you very much, Ruben. I think we can also try to find out if there are some questions in the Q&A box that we would like to pick up. One of them is was indeed how to advance recognition for teaching, and also how to promote interinstitutional cooperation, in a context where there can be competition between institutions. So, Mary and Philippe, I don't know if you would like to further comment on this. Perhaps starting with Mary, if you wish.
Thanks, Therese. Um, well, as alluded to in my initial contribution, what we've started to do within the Irish context is actually look at ways to advance the recognition piece. So while within the Irish context we have excellence in teaching awards at local level and regional level and national level, and these are very important and significant awards, it's equally important to look at a recognition piece around all professional development. So we've just started to scope out the context within the initial 7 partners within the Irish Universities Association, and that raw data will be available soon for sharing with those partners in a bid to identify as a sector how best we can do it. So even though technically we're all in competition, we all seek to gain from this process. So that's how we've managed to collaborate in a context where it is competitive, but at the same time realizing each institution may well have to do something along this space. So why not do it together, and why not explore and scope out the context in a way that would be helpful for all of us? In addition to that, when we talk about interinstitutional cooperation, a lot of the informal contexts and networks that we have within our roles can be really, really useful. And while the formal networks, are there in some instances, where they're not, it's really useful to have an informal network that you can rely on to share experiences and to share questions and challenges in a bid to find solutions in a much more efficient way when we are all so busy. And that's not going to impact on anybody's, competitive edge. It's just helping a colleague, and that will help across the sector. So that's been something really helpful within the Irish context too, that I'm very happy to report on. So I'll pass to you, Philippe, now.
No, nothing else on this topic. But for coming back to the previous question about formal and informal times, I would like to say a word about our experience in France. In France, we have created a national MOOC to help train teachers, and in many universities, this MOOC has been used to set up lunchtime meetings between teachers to discuss the theme of the week, for example, how to motivate the students. And these informal times between teachers from different fields are usually very, very interesting, very efficient to motivate each other. So I really believe that the institution should favorize this kind of informal meeting between teachers to talk together, to talk about research, to talk not only about research, but to talk about pedagogy. So I really think these informal meetings are essential.
Thank you very much, Philippe. All right, I think we have 5 minutes left, so I will pick up a last question from the Q&A box where people seem to have woken up, because actually I have several questions there. So it is about what you mentioned, Philippe, earlier. So recognition. What would you said that actually well, somebody took your word actually. You said that you don't really believe it's valid to say that there is no metrics or there is no indicator, let's say, be it qualitative or quantitative, it's not important, to measure teaching. But what would be then the most preferable or preferred way to evaluate teaching? And also there is a follow-up question: how can training activities in impact of these be effectively measured in order to be able to recognize this work for teachers? So in another ideal word, how would you do that?
So I'm not a specialist on pedagogical sciences, but the students are very important in this feedback, because clearly they know that some teachers are better, but not I'm not only talking about teachers, but some methods are better for such kind of course, and so on. So we have yes, to really listen the students. It's part of the answer, but I'm not clearly the best the best speaker for this topic. But we, in fact, we say there is no metrics, but are we trying to find some metrics? It's why I said it's a fake excuse, because it's too easy to say there is no way to really evaluate the performance of the teaching. So it's a maybe it's still an open topic, but we can't exclude the question of evaluation of teaching. If
Okay,
we do that, we'll never progress.
so what you mean is that what matters here is the journey as well.
Yeah.
We need to embark in this journey of trying to
Yes,
find
clearly.
out what we want for best teaching. All right. I see we have only a few minutes left, so I will pass the last word to Mary. If you have some conclusive thoughts you would like to share, and then after you to also Ruben. Thank you, Philippe.
Thanks, Philippe. Um, Overall, I think it's a really illuminating report, Trace. So thanks to you and colleagues for compiling it. There's a lot to be done, I think, within the sector, as you've identified, and a lot of them are actually quite interwoven. So if we achieve one, we might achieve many. So it's about putting that time into it. And I think the collaboration piece that has been coordinated so well by the EUA was very helpful. And likewise, within our own sectors, that we can coordinate it more nationally as well to embed some of what you're saying across our sectors. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'll pass the floor to Ruben, and then I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up already. Ruben.
All right, yeah, thank you as well from my side to you, Therese, Gohar, and everyone at EUA, and also to all participants in the Lotus project, because it was a very nice collaboration. I think this report also shows that there was some very good insights in there. And I think my takeaway from this entire project and my future-looking conclusion is to keep talking. All the institutions were so pleasantly surprised that others share the same problems and that they were able to learn so much from each other, even if they came from very different contexts. Um, and besides that, to also never forget the human in the student and in the teachers, and to make sure that to keep remembering that we're dealing with all people here, and that way we can really progress in how we do learning and teaching at our European universities.
Well, that sounds like a fine final words, Ruben. Ruben, so thank you so much. Yes, we are all people here. So the people-to-people connection is definitely so crucial. So thanks to all my speakers. Thank you so much, not only for this 1 hour spent together, but I have always a feeling that we could continue just for another hour. But that's fine. I won't take more of your time. But also thank you and to the three of you for everything you have done and committed to engage with the project in the course of these 2 years. So the speakers were referring to a report, and you, dear audience, you might wonder what exactly they are talking about because the report has not been issued yet, but it will come. It will come very soon, and stay tuned with the EUA newsletter and the EUA website, and it will be released normally very soon by the beginning of December. And the report will feature all the key messages and the recommendations that I just presented today. So thank you very much to our speakers. I think my colleagues have a last slide announcing the next event. Is that the case? Oh, yeah, it comes. All right. So there will be a recording of this webinar available on the attendee hub. I think this is something you can access with the registration link, and also on EUA's YouTube channel. Which is an open one, a public one. So the next an upcoming event from EUA I would like to advertise here is on the 8th of December. We have a webinar offering remote fellowships for at-risk researchers. This may also address one of the questions in the chat box that I actually did not have time to address. I'm sorry for this. How to address the leadership in teaching in a country in war, from our dear Ukrainian colleagues, of course. So on the 8th of December, there is a webinar on fellowships for at-risk researchers. And on the 12th of December, this is a hybrid event about transnational university cooperation. It takes place here in Brussels, but you can also watch it online and participate online. So this is also connected quite closely, actually, to the topic that we discussed today about interinstitutional cooperation. All right. Having said all this, dear participant, thank you very much for your participation. Thanks again to my three speakers, Mary Fitzpatrick, Philippe Lal, and Ruben Janssen. And I wish you all the best. And I will close now the webinar. Thank you very much. Bye.